was a new day. He could focus on a new one then. For now, he needed to bury his latest treasure. He held his breath as he climbed into the clunker he'd stolen years ago and started it. Then he pulled onto the road and drove around the block, parking just out of sight of the back of the now empty house. His pulse drummed with excitement. Burying the treasures was always just as thrilling as the rest of the process. A different but equal thrill. Part fear of getting caught, part saying goodbye, and part anticipation of the next treasure. The man looked around the quiet street before climbing out of his car and hefting the oversized suitcase from the trunk. The stench made his eyes water. He gagged and blinked away the tears, then lugged the treasure down the unlit back street until he reached the fence. He easily found the latch on the other side and flipped it over, unlocking the gate. It creaked as it opened, just like it had for years. It was almost as though he were the only one to use it. Once inside, he quickly closed the gate and looked around the large yard that he had long ago memorized. Everything was the same, except now the garden was expanding, taking up more of the yard. Ever since the couple's granddaughter started visiting them, the garden had been getting bigger and bigger. What he wouldn't do to get that little girl and add her to his treasure trove. He shook his head to clear it, then stared down at the spot he'd picked out just for this special prize. It was now or never. The man set down the suitcase and checked his thick gloves. Once he was ready, he found the shovel where it always rested against the house. He tightened the gloves and got to work digging close to the house, just off to the side of a small garden shed. The suitcase, his treasure trunk, wasn't very big this time, but he would still need to go deep. The last thing he needed was for the wife or grandchild to decide they wanted to start a new garden here, then find his latest prize. It was always a risk, given how many of his precious treasures had been buried on the grounds. This newest one was already close to the first one. Maybe they could keep each other company. That thought offered him solace until he could get his next one. After a while, sweat broke out on his hairline. He paused and wiped it while catching his breath. The sound of a car engine made him freeze in place. He listened, waiting for it to drive away. It didn't. Instead, it slowed, followed by the squeal of a vehicle's brakes. It sounded like it was in the front of the house. They couldn't be home already. This was the night they always left for a solid 3 hours, sometimes almost 4. The man leaned the shovel against the shed, crept over to the fence, and peeked over. He swore under his breath. They were home early. He knew performing the ritual was a bad idea when the schedule was off. His skin felt on fire. He ran back over to the suitcase and shoved it into the hole. Only about 3 inches remained between the top of it and the ground. There was no time to dig the hole deeper. A car door slammed, then another. Conversation. The man released a barely audible string of profanities as he filled the hole. He cursed the couple for not giving him enough time to properly say goodbye to his treasure. Once the hole was filled and the sizable chunk of grass placed back on top, he stared at the leftover dirt. Usually, he took his time carrying it over to the garden. A light shone from inside. It lit up a good portion of the backyard. Then it dimmed systematically. Someone was closing the blinds on the sliding door on the back porch. He glanced back at the pile of dirt. If he took it over to the garden, he would risk being seen. The only thing he could do was to spread it near the shed and hope nobody noticed. So that was what he did. By the time he had finished, he managed to convince himself it looked just like it had before, except that he'd covered grass with the dirt. It would have to do. He replaced the shovel as it had been, crept to the corner of the house, and checked the windows. Light shone from half a dozen of them, but they all had the blinds drawn.